I often find that students are averse to skipping questions, especially once they've started them. A sunk cost mindset sets in. It's like, I've already started working on this question, so I need to finish it. Otherwise, I've wasted that time. I think part of the reason for this is that students are so used to taking tests with enough time to leisurely make your way through the test, question by question, working on a problem until you get an answer or until you basically just give up for good. And while I think this approach is actually probably not great even for tests where you have enough time, I can understand why students default to that strategy and then why they apply that to tests like the SAT and ACT where it really isn't very helpful. Because it turns out that aggressively and strategically skipping questions with the intent to return to them later is one of the most important test-taking strategies to implement on the SAT and the ACT. And there's a few reasons for this. The first, time savings. It's best to spend your time on easy questions first, or at least questions that you can efficiently solve, and then leave harder questions until the end. Worst case scenario, if you run out of time, you'll have to guess on those hard questions. But this is much preferable to the predicament that many students find themselves in. Having spent too much time on harder questions earlier in the test, they have to rush or guess on easy questions later. It's a terrible trade. It must be avoided at all costs. Instead, you want to spend your time on the easy, doable questions, lock in those points, worry about the hard stuff, challenging stuff at the end. I've talked about this in a lot of videos, but it makes sense. You want to spend your time profitably on questions where you're going to earn points, and really hard questions, worry about them later. Second, morale and momentum. Getting stuck on a question, especially early in the test, can be demoralizing and discouraging, possibly affecting your performance later on the test. Your mindset, your approach has a significant impact on your ability to execute your test game plan. So you want to make sure to keep moving, keep up the pace, don't get bogged down. This is going to ensure you keep that positive outlook as you work your way through the test, and you don't get upset when a question doesn't go your way and it sort of ruins the rest of the test. Keep moving, keep up the pace, and that can help you avoid that issue. Third, and this is especially true in the reading and science sections of the SAT and ACT, sometimes you'll find new information for a previous question while you're working on later questions. As you work your way through the passages, as you figure out more of what's going on, that question that you might have first seen earlier in the passage set might make a lot more sense to you as you're working on other questions. Let's say you're taking a reading test and number 2, you just don't get what's going on with number 2. Instead of spending time then, skip it, work on other stuff, and you're probably going to find some information that will help you with that question later. It's just much more efficient. If instead you try to struggle your way through this question at the first encounter, you're relinquishing this opportunity to gain more info later and put it to good use. This is another way in which skipping questions can be more efficient and actually more effective in helping you answer questions. Finally, there's a subtle and I think unappreciated benefit to skipping questions and returning to them later. Have you ever spent time reviewing a test that you've completed, reviewing your wrong answers, and you find yourself kind of shaking your head at the mistakes you made? Like, oh, how could I make this mistake? This is so silly. What was I thinking at the time? Now, this is very normal, very natural. And I think part of the reason why this happens is when you get a chance to take a fresh look at the question when you're reviewing, you're freed of that mental fog of the testing experience. You're free of the peculiar ways that you were looking at that question at the time. When we're working on a test under pressure, it's super normal to get tunnel vision, to misread something in the question or totally miss it, or just have a little brain malfunction, a little brain glitch that just messes up how you're looking at the question. So if you keep working on that question at a time, if you keep fighting it, it's often very difficult to find your way out of that fog. You're just stuck in that moment. You're spinning your wheels. You can't get out of that rut. You're just stuck. But if you skip the question and you come back later, you might notice something that you didn't the first time, or you might generate an insight that will help you answer the question. When you're working on other questions later, your unconscious mind is actually always at work on that question that you skipped, sort of working in the background. And when you skip that question, you're giving your mind time to work on that question as you're consciously working on other ones in the meantime. This is a big win-win. So you go back to that question instead with a fresh outlook. Maybe the time pressure is off. You finish the rest of the section. You got a few questions left. You don't have to worry about, am I going to run out of time on stuff later? And take that pressure off, and you might very well get a breakthrough that you wouldn't have gotten the first time through if you had just sat there wrestling with it for 5 minutes. You may not have gotten that breakthrough without the distance that you give yourself by skipping it. So skipping questions not only will help you with your time and your efficiency, it could even help you answer questions that you might otherwise have gotten wrong in that first pass through. So to sum up, finish the easy questions first, skip tricky questions aggressively, come back to them at the end of the test when you finished the rest of the questions of that section with a fresh outlook, less pressure, and your score will benefit.